The Chicago Bulls lost to the Phoenix Suns yesterday, and highlighting the fact that this stretch that the Chicago Bulls on is really going to test just how competitive this team is. We had a successful return by Josh Giddey, even though Josh Giddey haters still finding ways to hate. We're going to discuss a few things and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And you know what? We're going to have a little bit of a different episode today, right? I know typically, I go through episodes, I have these defined topics. We're going to have a little bit, I don't know if I want to call it a rant, right? Maybe a structured rant, but just talking through some things, right? The first thing that I want to talk about is, of course, like this Bulls and their competitiveness, right? While the Chicago Bulls have been a team over the last, really, like since the trade deadline, right? We're over a month since the trade deadline at this point, and this Bulls team has been playing some really competitive basketball, right? Having one of the best defenses in the NBA over that time. There were some questions initially over how legit is that defense. And I think the effort that the Bulls have given means that the Bulls are always going to be now a team that's at least given effort on the defensive side of the ball, right? Now, they're going to have some times where their skill level doesn't necessarily allow them to be as effective defensively as they are against some teams, right? There are going to be some teams that just play into the Bulls' weaknesses on that defensive side of the ball. Ideally, sometimes size, right? Sometimes tenacity, right? That's the thing that we lack and that we miss sometimes. Not nearly as much as early on in the season, but this team has definitely developed more of an identity, right? And the only reason I've said this multiple times for anybody's like, but Haize, this is identity. They've done it for 20 games. Late game surges, right? And I want to be clear. I say this for everything, good and bad. March basketball can be really weird, right? You look at March basketball, and there are some teams that take their foot off the gas a little bit in March, right? And then they rev it back down in April, gearing into the playoffs. Some teams do that. I'm not saying necessarily that's the Bulls, right? They don't have the luxury of doing that. You also have, so sometimes the records can be a little weird, right? Sometimes you'll see some weird games. March basketball, for those that like have really, ingrained themselves in March basketball. Not to say that teams aren't necessarily trying. That's why I said that they ease their foot off the gas some, right? And then you, of course, see some teams that are they're going for it. Every single win, right? No matter where they're standing are. And sometimes that actually ends up hurting them in the playoffs where they do run out of gas when you kind of, that chess match in the playoffs becomes even more of a relevant thing, right? So March basketball can be a weird thing. Now, the Bulls and the things that they control in March have been consistent for the most part. The effort that they give, the communication that they have, right? The way that they rebound as a team, right? This team has forged way more of an identity over this stretch since mid-February to now than I would say they did from October to the end of December, for example, right? And some of that has definitely been new guys, right? And to see the connection that's already been forged, right? Like the Bulls dropped a video yesterday before the game of Josh Giddey and Trey Jones communicating together, right? And just them chilling in Phoenix, talking and things like that. And you get to see like this team through whatever it is, whether it's a bond through wanting to prove people wrong, whether it's that shared goal, that shared desire, because you got players playing well out of position, right? You got players playing in crazy positions, and still this team, throughout the lack of size at times, all those type of things, the lack of experience at times, have put themselves in a place to have a really good offense over this stretch and a really good defense over this stretch as well. And I think that comes down to a lot of the things that the Bulls are doing well. I think that this team fits together a lot better on top of, there's a better balance. And I also think, and I've said this before, last night was not the best night and example of this. I want to be clear. But Billy Donovan it's forced him in his bag to have to coach a little bit more than what he's had before, right? And so you look at the Bulls over the stretch of games, right? Let's look at the last 10 games. The Bulls have the 9th best defensive rating, the 19th best offensive rating. Now, 13th best net rating overall, right? And I think that's usually a good place where a team can be competitive in what they're going to do. Over the last 5 games, the Bulls have the 9th best net rating in the league, right? You look at over the last 20, they have the 20th best net rating in the league. Somewhere between those is where this team really is, right? And that's not a knock on the players. There's a knock on roster construction. Getting a guy like Nikola Vucevic back, who Vuce has his issues as a player, no doubt, right? But throughout this, keep in mind, they've been missing players, integrating players back from injury, integrating new players that weren't even here at the start of the season that have not only come here, but have taken on large roles like a Kevin Huerter, right? Who Kevin Huerter's talked about his place in this team and why it's really worked out for them. You have different layers of this team that just are figuring it out. And I know I've talked about that before, but there's something in that figuring it out that is the special sauce for the Bulls right now. Now, I want to be clear here. The Bulls are still, and I think we're going to see this over the next few games where the Bulls face off against some really good competition, right? You got Sacramento, Lakers, and Denver. You can turn around and got the Lakers when you finally do go back home as well, right? So it doesn't even stop there. You got OKC at home in the next couple of weeks as well. Like, the Bulls are going to face off against some of the top talent, not only in the Western Conference, but in the league. And that's a good measuring stick, or could be a good measuring stick if AK uses it well to really see, all right, where are we really at with this team, right? How competitive are we truly? Yes, you're in an Eastern Conference where your seeding is pretty damn good, but that's partially due as well to the fact that you've beaten a lot of bottom feeders, right? Now you've competed against some really good teams at that time where you've ended up losing that game, and I think that's where that's where the Bulls are going to kind of live at here over the next stretch, right? You got Sacramento, LA, Denver, LA again, right? Now you got Dallas after that, but then you got OKC, right? So these and then when you come back from that, you basically got 6 games left on the season after that stretch. The Bulls' 13 remaining games has to be about evaluation, right? And fair and honest evaluation. Not only with what your strengths are, but where your weaknesses truly are, so you can try to figure out how much of this is salvageable because we know that one thing AK is going to want to do is he's going to want to compete for the most wins possible even next year, right? And so, for my Bulls fans that had hope that this team was going to be a bottom feeder team for the next 2 years in the next 2 drafts that are really deep, there's a high probability that that's not the case, right? And so, you have a team like the Miami Heat, for example, that have lost 9 straight games, right? 9 straight. The Bulls, who have won 6 out of their last 10 games, right? They're 6-4 in their last 10. They've now leapfrogged them. They have a tied record technically, and now it's that rush, right? The Toronto Raptors are so far behind. I don't know. Like, every time that they lose now, they'd have to win like 4 in a row to really truly before I think they're really back in this race. But to get back onto where this is, right? With the judgment of players on this team, right? And I understand it that looking through a lens of this team, right? Looking through that lens of what you want this team to be. And we all do that as fans, right? I want to be clear. Everybody as fans views the team as where they personally want the team to be, and that colors their opinion and their evaluation of where the team currently is, right? Some people look at it, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong, look at it as, look, every year you're not a contender for at least your conference title. You haven't done enough. And that's fair, right? Some people look at it as in stages, like, hey, this is where we are now. This is where I want us to be realistically over the next year or so. And then let's take that phase and then look on how we jump there next, right? That's kind of more so how I look at it. I'm not a guy that, like some people have the large chasm of, yeah, but we're not going to win a title anytime soon. It's like, yeah, but you have to build to get to that, right? I look at the building process of that. And in the building process, the way that, again, I personally view sports, right, is that it is a process, right? You very rarely go from worst to first, right? You have to take steps in that direction to get to that process. But even in that, even if that's your view, people have a different view on how you get there. You have people that say, well, you got to get a star. And until you get a star, you should stay losing until you get that star to get that star in the draft. I personally look at it as, hey, who do we have on this team? What are they doing and growing? Kobe, Giddey, Matas, Julian, Dalen, even P. Will still, as much as I hate to admit it, right? Those 6 players are still players that I'm looking at and saying, all right, And how are they growing the game? My faith in P. Will is at an all-time low. I don't have faith in P. Will. I think P. Will at this point is going to be a bench player for his career. That's not necessarily a bad thing. He can be a productive bench player because I think, listen, if you can get 9, 10 points in 20 minutes coming off the bench in effective shooting and solid defense, that can keep you around in the league. Is it fourth overall production? No. But at this point, the way that I personally view, and the reason why I don't bring up Patrick Williams a lot, I don't even really complain about Patrick Williams a lot anymore because my mind has moved on from P. Will as being part of the Bulls core. If he's here, cool. He can be productive at times in XYZ role. If the Bulls move on from him, I'm not going to be like, oh, man, damn it, we got rid of P. Will. Like, that's where I'm at with P. Will. But the other players, Josh Giddey and Coby. Josh Giddey and Coby are so important as the Bulls roster is shaped up right now on this team getting to relevancy anytime soon. In what they do and how they balance each other on the court, how they find their chemistry together on the court, and it's getting better, y'all, right? And that's what I personally look at for this team. Right now, that is one of the most important things. Now, in the offseason, if they trade Coby, if they do not re-sign Josh Giddey, both things that I don't necessarily think are going to happen, but if they were to happen, all right, cool, then that changes some things, right? Like, what's the new direction at that point in time, right? That's how I'm looking at that. So, in looking and viewing it that way, yes, do I go through sometimes harsher criticisms of those guys or how they're used? Not necessarily on them, yes. But, we have over 1,000 minutes of Coby and Josh Giddey together. Over 1,000, right? And when you look at that, so far in the year, they have a negative rating of negative net 3. But at the start of the year, they had a negative net rating together on the court of negative 18. That's how much better they're starting to figure it out. Again, it's not small sample size. 1,000 minutes together they've played. Over 1,000 minutes that they've played together, right? And their defensive rating has improved over that time. The offensive rating has improved over that time. The assist ratio is almost at 70% when those guys are on the court together. And I think you still have to figure out how to balance them. Keep in mind, even over that time, the starting lineup that they've been with has changed 6 times. 6 different times. Having Josh Giddey and Coby White in the lineup together as the constant, you've seen 6 different starting lineups with those guys, right? And that's even just 6 different starting lineups that have played more than 40 minutes together. So there's still other versions of the starting lineup that they played together with as well, right? So it's been a season where that's been up and down. Then you look at, they've both suffered major injuries as far as missing some significant time. That's affected that. But when you really look at specifically over this last 10-game period for the Chicago Bulls, they've flipped that net rating into being net 5, a positive net rating of 5, right? Which isn't tremendous, but if your 2 highest usage rate players have a positive net rating of 5 and above, typically that is a team that is competing at least for a playoff spot. If you have your 3 highest usage rate players all at above a net positive of above 5, that's typically, then you are a playoff team, right? And so looking at how that balance shakes out, that's really the thing that I'm looking at the most importantly this season, right? Matas, of course, is an important part of that. And I think that it's reached this boiling point now in the Bulls season where, I mean, just to be frank, there's so much bitching going on, right? From fans over players that are, like I've said before, that are just out there trying to do their job. That's what these guys are out here trying to do. They're growing, they're developing, they're working on their game, right? And while there is absolute reason for criticism, the hate that sometimes gets thrown towards those 2 players specifically is really ridiculous. Right now, again, not saying criticism, I'm saying hate, right? Those are 2 very different things. We want to be clear here. Every single player in the NBA, whether you're a superstar or a bench role player, can be criticized. There's not a single player that is not deserving of criticism in how they play the game, because there's no perfect player, right? So that's a different thing. But it's turned to this thing now where it's not criticism, it is hate through a veil of trying to present it as criticism. And that's fine. There's no way to avoid that. You're never going to remove that from the game, right? But when you look at a guy like Josh Giddey, who made his return after an ankle injury and did pick it right up where he left off. Fair criticism. Hey, is he going to be able to do this again next year? Is this just a hot stretch at the end of the season with expectations removed? I can understand that question being there, right? I can always understand that question. I've had that over the years of certain players as well. But then when you look at Josh Giddey and what he's specifically doing over this stretch, like you're seeing a player, again, and this is where it kind of separates the people that watch games versus the people that watch box scores, right? And that is a shot at you if you do that, because again, there's a level of conversation you can have there, but then there's people that try to have this insightful basketball conversation when you're not watching games, you're watching the box score, right? But when you see how Josh Giddey, for example, yesterday, he didn't get to the free throw line, but his three ball was falling at a 50% rate. In prior games, his three ball wasn't falling. He was getting to the free throw line at almost 7 attempts per game, right? That shows a level of awareness in what you're doing to get your offense, him and Coby White, right? We talked so often earlier in the season how Kobe's shot had changed because he was made to be more of a jump shooter, whereas early in the season, almost 60% of Coby White's offense was coming off of jump shots, right? And above the break threes, corner threes, right? And Coby is a player that has always been more impactful and better when you allow him to drive. Now, you have to find a balance between having the ball in Kobe's hands and the ball in Josh Giddey's hands. And I, of course, have my doubt over if Billy Donovan is the right guy that's going to be able to consistently coach that to the level that it needs to be. But you're seeing a better understanding of both these guys of how they play together. And that's not only beneficial for their future. If they figure it out, it's beneficial for the Bulls' future. You know why? If your backcourt is figured out, and it is still an if, right? But if you can figure out your backcourt with a 22-year-old Josh Giddey and a 25-year-old Coby White, that then allows you to focus on the other positions, right? Positions that we still have question marks on. Matas, is he a 3 or a 4 long term, right? I know that people like to pencil him in as just a 4 he's played for, which could end up being his position. But with his ball handling, his quick first step off the dribble, I can see Matas playing a 3 depending on what else you get, right? So Matas could be an answer for a position, either the 3 or the 4. That still leaves the 4 or the 5 that you have to figure out long term. Zach Collins, Jalen Smith have been great, right? But they aren't going to be the long-term answers there for the Chicago Bulls. They're just not. And that's no knock on them, but I think you look at both of those guys as quality depth, right? And, depending on what else you get, right, maybe they can start for you, but you're still, by the time you want to get to where you want to get to, you're probably going to upgrade one of those positions, right? So over the next 2 years, can the Bulls find answers to 2 more of the positions? If Josh Giddey and Coby are there. Still an if there. I want to be clear there. There's still an if there, and that's not a knock on them, but that's also down to the front office. Are they going to want to spend the money for both these guys, right, at this point? There's a question mark there. I would assume, well, how does he factor into that, right? Do you go best player available in this draft rather than a position? And if the best player available is a shooting guard, what does that mean for the future of Coby White, right? So there's a lot of still intangibles that are there that this team has to figure out. And I think that that's a fair thing to say. Right? I know as a Bulls fan, we want to say, all right, bet, we're going to go in, we're going to get our center, boom, we're going to get our center, we add that to that. But that's not always the way that it happens, right? If you have a prospect, like I've said before, if the Bulls do get lottery luck and say they fall at number 4, to me, Trey Johnson, I don't think you can pass him up. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think that you can do that, which means that it now puts the future of Coby in doubt on what's going to happen there, right? So we'll see. And I think a lot more clarity is going to come along as this season goes on and as we get closer to the draft process. But overall, what we're still trying to figure out here, right, is not only where this team is, but how the pieces fit together. And that's the thing that we're starting to learn more. We can have a conversation all day. They're beating above 500 teams, below 500 teams, whatever that record is there. Doubt about how consistently other players can do some other things. But this is the time and the opportunity that the Bulls now have allotted themselves to figure it out. Before, when you had DeMar, Vooch, Zach, and the team built around them, you didn't really have enough time to figure it out as much. You try to have to figure it out on the fly because that team was trying to compete now. Not to say that this team isn't trying to win as many games as possible now. They still are doing that. But you have a little bit more now leeway and runway to allow players time and opportunity to really figure out what they are individually and collectively, right? That prior team, you were looking for them to fit into certain roles. This team, the roles are undefined, which is why you're seeing everybody integrated as well as what they are. You also got guys like Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, Zach Collins. What are their long-term prospects for this team, or do they end up being trade pieces for you? I would love for them to stay. They've all played really well for this Bulls team, but this is still a business. And if teams that are further along in their process come calling, will AK and Eversley listen? Are they willing to take what comes back? That remains to be seen on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z. But the place that we're in right now is a place that I think Bulls fans are kind of unfamiliar with because you haven't truly been in this type of place for probably 10 years, right? I get it that through that Zach LaVine era, we were still drafting Laurie and Wendell and trying to hope that we were figuring out a core. It's more than just that now. Like that front office had no idea, no desire to look at players that fit together organically. I do think that AK is looking more at a long-term fit. I think we also have a better coach than Jim Boylan to figure that out. Still, Billy Donovan has his own flaws, big flaws, but I think he's better at evaluating how those pieces can fit together, so to say, right? So, overall in this period, as we go through this last 13 games of the season, it really is truly about evaluation, processing, and fit. And we'll see where that ends up falling for the Chicago Bulls. But let me know what you guys think down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.